guys, welcome to my first drive video on this updated 2025 Audi SQ7. This particular press car is a black edition, which is the entry-level model here in the UK. Starts at £94,200. Typically this does have a few extra options on top of that, one being this gorgeous chili red paintwork, which is new for the updated SQ7, and it has a Tech Pack Pro S kit and a trailer assist, which is essentially a retractable tow bar, meaning this car has an on-the-road retail price, as it stands, of £98,000. When Audi first launched the SQ7 back in 2019, it came with a V8 diesel. A couple of years later, in 2021, they replaced the V8 diesel with a V8 petrol. And I'm glad to say that this latest updated version continues to use the V8 petrol. Although this car is a facelifted model, I would call it a minor facelift, and many of those changes are visual changes on the outside of the car. Most notable is probably around the front end. It's a redesigned bumper, redesigned grille, we have the new Audi rings, we have a new headlight design, and within that headlight we actually have 4 different daytime running light options. When we get around the side of the car, we have some new wheel options. In fact, there are 2 wheel options, both of them are 22-inch. These are my favourite out of the 2. Also, in line with the majority of new Audis, you can now see the make and model on the B-pillar, which I think is a smart little touch. There are 2 things that make the SQ7 rather unique. One of those is under the bonnet, and we'll look at that in a second. The other thing is the fact that it's a 7-seater. So we have 3 rows of seats. But before we talk about the seats, let's just talk about the boot capacity. So with all of the seats up, i.e. in the 7-seat configuration that you're seeing right now, you still have 300 litres of boot space, which is relatively impressive. If we fold this rear row down, which is electronic, well, that then gives us a boot capacity of 620 litres. If we then fold down the second row of seats, so leaving us with the 2 front seats, this car will give you 1900 litres of boot space. So it's extremely practical. Focusing on that second row of seats, well, each seat is individually adjustable forwards and backwards. On the same control panel that operates these rear seats, we also have a button that will bring out the retractable tow bar, and we have a button for lowering the rear suspension. This car comes standard on Audi's adaptive air suspension, which is a good thing because that adds ride quality, and it also means that this car is capable of going off-road because you can lift it right up. I think it adjusts up to 80 millimeters. At the moment, it's in dynamic, so it's sitting quite low and allows you to easily load things in. But if you're in comfort and it's sitting a little bit higher, you just hit that button and it will lower the rear boot lip, essentially making it more practical and easy to use. Right, let's put that back in, close this up, and I'll see you around the front. Under the bonnet, we have a thumping V8. This is a 4-litre V8 twin turbo. Produces 507 horsepower and 770 newton meters of torque. That maximum torque figure is available from just 2,000 RPM. In fact, this 4-litre V8 lump is the same lump that we'll find in Bentley's Bentayga V8S or Porsche's Cayenne S that I recently had on the channel, or Porsche's Cayenne GTS even. It's also the same basic lump that we find in cars like Audi's very own RS6 and RS7 Performance, even their new flagship RSQ8 Performance. Well, it still has this engine. So although this car, as optioned, is almost £100,000, when you combine all of that practicality and all of this engine, I think it represents reasonably good value in 2025. That runs through a familiar ZF 8-speed automatic gearbox and is fed to the ground via Audi's Quattro all-wheel drive system. They claim this near 2.3 tonne 7-seater bus will do the 0 to 62 sprint in just 4.1 seconds. let's test out this car's claimed acceleration figures. Audi say it will do the 0 to 62 sprint in 4.1 seconds. I'm in dynamic. I'm going to let the gearbox do the shifting. Stability and traction is switched off. My Racebox Mini is now ready to go. Left foot's hard down on the brake, right foot on the accelerator. Here we go. Oh my goodness, how good does that sound? And there's 60 miles an hour, 3.82 seconds to 60 miles an hour in a 7-seater. Jumping inside, and there's literally been no updates or changes as far as I can see. I think they offer a few different interior trims, which maybe this is one of, but otherwise it's standard affair. I guess that's a good and a bad thing. It's a good thing because, well, it's already a nice interior, and although it's been around for what must be 6 or 7 years now, this layout, it's not dating too badly. It's a bad thing because, well, I just expected a little bit more from Audi. Maybe expected them to update and improve the seats a little bit. I've always found these seats to be a little bit small for my lanky frame. You might be able to spot on the camera that my head is somewhat above the headrest, and obviously that's not adjustable because it's all one piece. They're relatively comfortable. They do look nice. These ones are heated. You can probably get them ventilated potentially in the Vorsprung model. But overall, it is a nice cabin. This one has the all-important panoramic roof, which is part of that Tech Pro Plus SS pack. I think that's about $3,000 off the top of my head. But it's definitely worth having if you're using this as a family car. And if you're buying one of these 7 seats, you're probably buying it as a family car. The reason I say that is it adds more light to the rear of the cabin, and this car has a rear of the cabin, and if you didn't have that roof and you're sitting on the 3rd row of seats, well, I think it would be really dark and depressing back there. So really consider getting a nice glass pan roof, because it does add light, which in turn adds a little bit of mental space, if you like. But in terms of actual driving positions, well, it's not too bad at all. Audi have improved their overall driving positions in all of their latest models, and they definitely tend to suit a wider range of shapes and sizes, and that does include the Q7 platform. It's lovely and commanding, and I do talk about this quite a lot in my videos, although I do prefer sports cars or saloons and Tourings, or Avants as Audi would call them. I have to admit that when you are in an SUV like this and you've had it for a while, I've had this car for a week, you do get used to the commanding driving position. You get used to seeing further down the road, whether you're on a dual carriageway like this, a motorway, or one of your favourite A or B roads. Just allows you to see over the hedgerows a little bit for pedestrians, cyclists, horses, other road users essentially, which in turn makes it a little bit safer, especially if you're pushing on a little bit. We've already talked about this SQ7 coming standard with Audi's brilliant adaptive air suspension. We'll get into reasons why that's good a little bit later. It also comes standard with Audi's rear axle steering, and I'll hopefully be able to demonstrate why that is good on this tiny little roundabout. I'm just going to come around here. I hope that car sees me. Thank you very much. Now, if this car didn't have rear axle steering in that instance, I would have probably had to have done a 3-point turn. Rear axle steering essentially makes the car feel shorter and more nimble. So with anything that's more than 5 meters long, like this car, it's almost essential, especially if you're using it in towns and cities. Maneuvering's easier, and getting in and out of parking spaces is easier. And when you pick the speed up, it also helps with the mass of the car. It reduces the feel. It gives you more agility, if you like. And Over the years, Audi have fine-tuned their rear axle steering to feel really organic. In fact, if you didn't know it was in this car, you probably wouldn't feel it until you went to do something like that maneuver back there and realised that you can turn on a much tighter radius than you would otherwise have done. I mentioned on the outside that the SQ7 is fairly unique with 7 seats and a thumping V8 under the bonnet. There are other cars that have a similar recipe, and the one that I'm quite familiar with, and the one that we're going to talk about today, is BMW's X7 M60i xDrive. That car also has a V8 under the bonnet and it has 7 seats, although an X7 M60i will set you back, I think it's £114,000 base price. So that's 20 odd thousand pounds more than the SQ7. But I have to say the third row of seats back there, i.e. the further seats from me in the BMW X7, well, those ones definitely offer you more space and more luxury compared to Audi's SQ7. The X7 M60's 4.4 litre V8 twin turbo also offers a little bit more power at 530 horsepower. It's about 23 extra horses, but it's about half a second slower to 60 miles an hour. And the reason for that is the X7 weighs 400 kilos more than an SQ7. The SQ7 actually has 7 different drive modes, from off-road up to dynamic. I'm currently in individual, so I've configured that to my favourite settings. Things like the engine or throttle response are ramped right up into dynamic, but the ride quality is in comfort because I live in the UK. And remember, this car comes standard on 22-inch wheels with fairly low profile tyres. So even though it has Audi's wonderful adaptive air suspension, you do need that knockback into comfort to give you a relatively comfortable ride. But when you are in comfort, it sits a little bit higher than if you're in dynamic, and it does roll around a little bit more, but the suspension in general is really, really good. And although ride quality is good, it's not as good as Audi's very own RS6 and RS7. I find with those models, when you knock it back into comfort, it really does give you comfort. It might have something to do with this particular car weighing a little bit more, and the fact that it does have to support something that is higher. It sits higher off the ground, and therefore, whether it's springs or air, you definitely need a little bit more support. Now we know this car is fast, at least in a straight line, let's go down here to the Drive Select and put it into dynamic, which is the most aggressive mode in this car. Dynamic means the ride height drops a little bit, lowering that center of gravity, and instantly as I turn it in here, I can feel that that roll has more or less gone at these slower speeds. Throttle response is turned right up, everything is turned right up in dynamic. I've also moved the gear selector over to the left, which gives me manual on the paddles, and we'll push on a little bit and see what this car's like. It's a 7-seater, 2.3-ish ton bus, so we're not going to expect miracles. It's definitely not going to be an RS6 or something like Audi's brilliant RS3, but is it going to give us any kind of driving pleasure? Well, the first thing to note is I can hear that exhaust note a little bit more. I can hear that wonderful sledgehammer of a V8. And that is something that I couldn't hear when I recently tested Porsche's Cayenne. That Cayenne didn't have the sports exhaust, but I just couldn't hear anything in the cabin. It was really disappointing. Whereas this car, I think Audi have really nailed it on the head. When you're in comfort, you can just about hear that V8 and just purrs away in the background. But when you put it into dynamic, you're definitely very aware that it has a V8. It sounds awesome. It sounds almost as good as an RS6 and an RS7. That's what I think an SQ7 should be all about. We know its pace in a straight line is good. What's it like when you start pushing it through corners? Well, this particular road isn't the best in terms of handling dynamics. But yesterday, off camera, I did push it through one of my favorite twisty roads, and it was pretty respectable. Although once you started getting near its grip limits, the car just started to understeer, and that was with everything switched off. And I guess that's what you want in your big 7-seater family car. It's the safest way to approach, let's say, grip limits or cars limits. But it wasn't disappointing. I was still having fun, but I was very aware of its weight and its mass. It didn't shrink around me in the same way that, let's say, Audi's RSQ8 or RSQ8 Performance does. Those models seem to defy physics altogether, whereas this one, although it does a good job at pushing physics to one side, you're very aware of its size and of its weight. What's my conclusion of Audi's updated SQ7? Well, I've always been a fan of this model, especially since Audi put the V8 petrol in it back in 2021. And I guess they have made a few positive changes to this very latest model, but they could have done a few extra things, if I'm being honest. At £94,000 base, it's hardly cheap, but we're in 2025 essentially, and everything is expensive, including cars like BMW's X7 M60i, which is 20-odd thousand pounds more. So when you compare it to other luxury 7-seater cars on the market that have got V8s, I guess it is relative good value. And if you're looking at a 7-seater car that still gives you a little bit of thrills and excitement on the weekend, well, I guess this has got to be it, especially for under £100,000 new. I have enjoyed my week with this car and kind of wish that I had it for more of the winter months, because it'd be a great car to cruise around in. Also, Peggy really likes the boot, especially when we got the furthest row folded down. She has that 620 litres of boot space to play around with, the side windows, the back window, and she can look forward quite easily. She's really enjoyed being lugged around in this car. It's also been really useful to take down to our recycling centre and remove large loads of my messy garage, because once again, just has so much load lugging capacity back there. So overall, I do really like this car. I've always liked it, and it's great to see that Audi continue to sell it into 2025. There will be an all-new Q7 coming in the next 18 to 24 months, so I look forward to seeing what that's all about. But in the meantime, this is still a good car. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give us a thumbs up, leave any comments and questions below, and I'll see you on another video very, very soon. Cheers.